All right, conference championship game weekend. I'm going to give you a brief preview and my prediction for all five Power Five conference championship games. Now, the ACC, the Pac-12 championship game comes on tonight. I'm recording this video at like 5 in the afternoon on Friday. Pac-12 championship tonight, 8 o'clock, Southern Cal and Utah. Maybe the most important of the conference championship games, depending on how you feel about TCU and if they lose, could they still get in? But if Southern Cal loses, they're for sure out, right? So Ohio State fans watching this game closely tonight, the Southern Cal-Utah game. I will be live streaming this game at 8 o'clock. So let's start with that one. I'll be live tonight, 8 o'clock. We'll watch the Pac-12 championship game together, Southern Cal and Utah. These two teams have already played. This time, Southern Cal is a 2.5-point favorite. They lost when they played back in October on the road, Salt Lake City. The game was at Utah. One of the best games of the season. I know not a lot of y'all watched it. I don't know, man. People's opinion of the Pac-12 from years past carried over into this year, and it's an inaccurate opinion. The Pac-12 was really, really good football this year. There are several really good teams out there. Southern Cal and Utah are two of those teams. But it was a great game when they played the first time. Southern Cal had the lead late in the game. Utah scored with under a minute to go. An extra point would have tied it up. Utah said, no, forget that. They went for two. They won. And that was that. They won by 1 point with a 2-point conversion at the end of the game. I think Southern Cal wins today. I just think Southern Cal is a better team. I think Southern Cal was a better team on that day back in October when they played. It was a road game for them. That Utah, so you had a home crowd. Not a weird ending, but, going for two there, gutsy. If it doesn't work out, Southern Cal is currently undefeated. It did work out. Southern Cal's got the one loss. Right now they're sitting at fourth. They need this win. If they don't win, they're out of the playoff. That's for sure. I think they find a way to get it done. Caleb Williams and that offense has been humming along, and whatever you think about Lincoln Riley, look, we've seen him do this 3 or 4 times. It's not a surprise, or it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody, that Lincoln Riley is the head coach of a team that's got a really good offense and is, or at least looks like, is about to make their way into the playoffs. That's not a surprise. Also not a surprise that Southern Cal's defense is not very good. It's just not. Go back to that Utah game. Track meet type of game. The final score was, 43-42? Something like that. It was a very high scoring game. And Southern Cal's defense has been like that all year. The one positive you can point to, and this is a big deal for Southern Cal's defense, is creating turnovers. They're one of the best teams in the country at creating turnovers. In fact, their turnover margin, they might be number 1 in the country. They're top 5, though. But they've been at or near the top in the country all year long in turnover margin. They don't turn it over on offense, and they create a ton of turnovers on defense. That's a positive for their defense, but the defense is not great. So you shouldn't be surprised that Southern Cal is in a position late in the year where they can win a conference title game and make the playoffs. We've seen Lincoln Riley do this a bunch of times. Now, if they get into the playoffs and actually win a game, that would be a miracle, which probably won't happen. Southern Cal's likely not going to win a playoff game because of that defense. But anyway, back to this game, Southern Cal and Utah. Another weird thing about that first meeting back in October, Utah's tight end, Kincaid, one of the best tight ends in the country. And look, I'm obviously a Georgia fan. Brock Bowers is amazing. For my money, I think he's the best tight end in football. But you can make an argument for Kincaid at Utah, Mayer at Notre Dame. There's plenty of good tight ends out there. And Kincaid is on every single list you look at. In that game, the first time back in October against Utah, he had 250 yards receiving, something like 15 or 16 catches, a couple of touchdowns. I mean, he had more yards, catches, and touchdowns in that game than some tight ends have in an entire season. He's not going to match that production again, I don't think. Even for Kincaid, who's an amazing tight end, that's a career-type day. I don't see that happening again. And it turns out Utah needed every single one of those catches, yards, and touchdowns from Kincaid to win that game the first time. I also think that right now Southern Cal is playing their best football of the season. They're playing really, really good football. Caleb Williams is likely to win the Heisman Trophy. He would be my pick now. I think he solidifies that tonight with a big win over Utah, claiming a Pac-12 title for Southern Cal and Lincoln Riley's first year and punching their ticket to the playoffs. I think this is going to be a really good game. I'm excited to watch it tonight. I hope you guys will join me, 8 o'clock right here on this channel. I'm going to stream the game and hang out with you guys, and we'll talk about that Pac-12 title game. But my pick there, Southern Cal to win and cover the 2.5. Now we'll move on to the Saturday games. Kansas State at TCU. TCU's favored by 1.5. Another rematch. In the Big 12, there's 10 teams, so everybody plays everybody. They play 9 conference games, round robin. So these teams have already played once. And we all know the story of TCU this season. Even if you haven't watched a lot of TCU football, we all know their story just because it's been talked about so much. They're undefeated, but barely, right? They're always losing in the second half, it seems like. They're always having to come back in the fourth quarter and win, it seems like. And when they played Kansas State the first time around, that was definitely the case. In fact, Kansas State was all over TCU. I believe it was 28-10 at one point. Kansas State was up. This was back when Adrian Martinez was still playing quarterback. He got hurt in that game, had to go out. The backup came in. The backup then got hurt. He had to go out. The third string quarterback came in, and basically Kansas State couldn't get a first down. They were up 28-10, Kansas State was. They ended up losing 38-28. So TCU came all the way back from 3 scores down to win by 10 points, 38-28. They scored 28 unanswered points at the end of that game to win really comfortably in the end by 10. I don't think they're winning this game by 10 this time. Now, it looks like Adrian Martinez is not going to play, but the backup has looked pretty good the last couple of weeks, and Kansas State still has Deuce Vaughn. And Deuce Vaughn, he is or can be an X factor in every single game that Kansas State plays. If you haven't watched the Kansas State game, keep an eye on Deuce Vaughn. If you're my age and you remember Barry Sanders, no, I am not saying that Deuce Vaughn is as good as Barry Sanders. I think Barry Sanders is one of the greatest running backs to ever walk the planet. This guy reminds me of Barry Sanders, though, as far as how he plays. First of all, he's really, really small, but he's put together. He can take a hit. He's not thin. Not that he's fat. You just look at him, you know what I mean. But he has got every single video game move ever. The jump cuts, the jukes, the spins, the straight line speed. He's both quick and fast, and yes, there's a difference. He is so much fun to watch. And if he gets going in this game, that could spell bad news for TCU. Even though they're down to their backup quarterback, Deuce Vaughn is the X factor in this game, I think. He is so much fun to watch. For TCU, they don't play great defense either, which is a little strange to say because for a long time when we watched Big 12 football, especially going back 3, 4, 5 years, kind of the rise of Lincoln Riley, it seemed like everybody in the Big 12 was playing a similar style of football, right? It seemed like they were throwing the ball 50 times a game, scoring 50 points a game, and not putting any effort or energy at all into defense, except for TCU. Now, this is when they had Gary Patterson as head coach. He, of course, gone. First-year head coach there, now from SMU. But anyway, TCU used to be, the only team in the Big 12 you can count on to play defense every year. Their defense is not great this year. In fact, it kind of reminds me of Southern Cal. They give up a lot of yards and a lot of points. Now, they've played good at times this year, but overall their defense is not why they're 12-0 and likely headed to the playoffs. It's Max Duggan in that offense. It's TCU. Max Duggan is great. This isn't to take anything away from Max Duggan. There's not really any superstars on TCU's offense. Max Duggan's fun to watch. He can make all the throws. He's not afraid to take off running. He's a tough guy. He's not afraid to take a hit, which is, C.J. Stroud. You might want to watch Max Duggan play and take some notes on that. But anyway, they just seem to find a way offensively to get it done when they need it the most. TCU's probably been the funnest team to watch this year, honestly. It's been a great story for one because they're not a traditional powerhouse team, right? You're not used to seeing them ranked in the top 5 this late in the season. They're undefeated. They're headed to the playoffs most likely. So it's a good story. But besides that, they're just a fun team to watch, especially offensively. And every single one of their games, well, almost every single one of their games this year has been an edge-of-your-seat nail-biter well into the fourth quarter. Now, they took care of business last week against Iowa State, no problem, but Iowa State's the worst team in the Big 12 this year if you're going by record. They were up on Iowa State, I think, 24-0 in the first quarter. So you can make an argument. TCU played one of its best games of the year last week, which is what you want to be doing this time of year. You want to be playing your best football at the end of the year. You can always say, yeah, well, but it was Iowa State. That's true. I don't think they're going to get out to a 24-0 lead over Kansas State. These are 2 really good young Power 5 coaches. Well, I say young, new to the Power 5, right? Cliff Kleiman's only been at Kansas State for, I think this is his 3rd year. And then, I can't believe I'm drawing a complete blank on the TCU guy's name now. He came from SMU, Sonny Dykes. Sonny Dykes' first year at TCU after taking over for a longtime head coach. I'm drawing a blank on his name. The guy. Look, I'm not an analyst. I'm not some professional TV studio guy. I just watch the games on TV. Okay, I'm not no analyst, so I'm drawing a blank on the other guy's name now that they fired. He was the head coach there forever. I love the guy. He's on the Texas staff now. He's a defensive coach for Texas now. Gary Patterson. I knew it would come to me. I'm just a fan like y'all. I just sit around and watch the games. I don't sit around and make 2 hours worth of notes before I make one of these videos. Sorry, I don't. All I did was look up the point spreads. I don't, if you want professional ESPN style commentary on the games, go to ESPN. All y'all do is complain about ESPN. So who cares if I can't remember a coach's name every once in a while? Gary Patterson, ex-coach. Sonny Dykes, current coach. Sonny Dykes first climbing for the Big 12 title. And I don't know. Y'all can let me know in the comments if you think TCU can still make it into the playoffs with a loss. I feel like they probably can. Now, they can't get blown out. They can't lose by 28 points or anything. They can't lose, they can't lose this game 48-20 or something like that. But if they lose on a last-second field goal or they lose by a touchdown, but it's a one-possession game in the fourth quarter, I feel like TCU will probably still get in at that 4th spot. But this is going to be a great game. To me, this one is the hardest one to pick. Because I do think Kansas State's a legitimately good team, and I think they've proven that over the course of the season, despite the issues they've had at quarterback. Adrian Martinez has been hurt multiple times over the course of the season, hasn't played in 2 or 3 weeks, not expected to play this season or this week. But the backup, like I said, has played really good the last couple of weeks, and it hasn't cost TCU, at least in terms of wins or losses. So he's gained more experience week after week with more and more playing time. And like I said, they've always got Deuce Vaughn. And if Deuce Vaughn gets up in the 150 to 200 range, Kansas State's got a very good shot of winning this game. I'm excited to watch that one. That one comes on tomorrow. I can't go against TCU. I have been saying for about 2 months, TCU's going to lose. They can't keep, playing this close to the fire. Eventually, they're going to get burned. And I even said a couple of times, I don't know which game it'll be, but they're going to lose one. Well, I'm tired of saying that. I keep saying that. All they do is keep coming out and winning. Now, this will probably be the week they lose because I'm picking them to win, and this is their last chance before the playoffs. But I think TCU gets it done. Then we got the SEC championship game, and I will admit I'm an SEC homer. I think, the SEC, I think, is the best brand of football around. Not to take anything away from the other conferences. I watch college football coast to coast every single Saturday. I love all of college football, but SEC is kind of my first love. And so I'll admit that. This is probably, I think, one of the least interesting SEC championship games in a while. The reality is, I had a lot of fun with this in the offseason, a little bit of trolling. But, what makes trolling, what separates like elementary trolling from what I think is like pretty good trolling is when there's some truth to your trolling. And the truth is the SEC West is not very good this year. I'm not going to compare it to the Big Ten West like I've done over the last few weeks when I was clearly trolling. But the SEC West is just not at the level this year that it has been in years past. Now, that in and of itself doesn't mean that LSU isn't a great team. But LSU isn't a great team either. I mean, Alabama's got the 2 losses. They could easily have 2 or 3 more. Auburn was in the toilet, fired their coach. Ole Miss and Mississippi State are basically 500 teams. Arkansas underachieved this year, which... When was the last time you really could say that about Arkansas? I mean, they were expected to win nothing for a while. Won 7 or 8 games. They regressed this year. They looked bad. Texas A&M was probably the most overhyped team in America in the offseason. One of the most disappointing seasons of any team in the Power 5. Texas A&M, just terrible. And they beat LSU last week, and it wasn't close. LSU does have the win over Bama. Look. That's great. Brian Kelly's first year in LSU has been a success. It doesn't matter what happens tomorrow in the SEC championship game. And I mean, I don't know why Georgia's winning the game. Now, will they cover the spread at 17.5? We'll talk about that in a second. LSU's not on Georgia's level this year, in my opinion. The guys, Georgia, of course he says that. Georgia's a 17.5 point favorite. So it's got nothing to do with me being a Georgia homer. Literally, 99% of people walking around just feel like Georgia's a much better team, and they are. That doesn't mean Georgia will win, though. Upsets happen all the time. I get that. Upsets of 17 points, though, rarely happen in a conference championship game. Usually when you see these big upsets, it's in the middle of the season somewhere when a team fell asleep. Georgia's not going to be asleep in this game. LSU, I just don't think's got what it takes, particularly offensively, to beat a team like Georgia. You add to the fact that Jaden Daniels has been hobbled around this week with a sore ankle that he injured in the game last week against Texas A&M, so we don't know how close to 100% he's going to be. And him running around is a huge part of what LSU does offensively because he's not a great thrower of the football. He's just not, which is a shame for LSU because they've got some NFL wide receivers on that team. But look at the numbers these wide receivers have put up this year. It's not very impressive. Kayshon Boutte, or whatever the hell his name is, supposed to be one of the best receivers in all of college football. He's had a disappointing season. I don't think it's his fault. Jaden Daniels just isn't the type of quarterback that's been able to get him the ball. LSU was living died off Jaden Daniels' ability to run the ball. And with a bum ankle coming into this game against the best defense Jaden Daniels will have ever seen in his entire life, because you got to remember, he started out in the Pac-12 playing those teams. He came to LSU, so he saw some decent defenses this year in the SEC West. Nothing like what he's going to see when he plays Georgia on Saturday, though. So the reality is, yes, LSU is the best team in the SEC West, but the best team in the SEC West doesn't mean this year what it normally means in years past. It just doesn't. It's been a down year for the SEC West. Tennessee beat LSU at LSU by 40 points. The game was over 10 minutes into the game. LSU beat Arkansas, a team we just talked about that's horrible, 13-10 a couple of weeks ago. They did beat Alabama, and no matter what happens in the SEC championship game, this first year for Brian Kelly at LSU is going to be a successful season. Any season you beat Alabama at LSU is a successful season. They won the division, punched their ticket to Atlanta. They'll get an opportunity to take on the King of the Mountain, which right now in college football is Georgia. Defending national champions, currently undefeated and ranked number 1. Right now, Georgia is the premier program in college football. I know that makes a lot of you mad to hear because of the messenger, because of who's telling you, me. But it's just true. I'm sorry. It's just true. Georgia hasn't lost a regular season game since halfway through the COVID year in 2020. The only game they've lost at all since then was the SEC championship game last year to Bama, which, of course, they revenged in the national title game. They're getting ready to go back-to-back national champions, something that hadn't been done in college football in 15 years. Georgia's the premier program in college football, and LSU, as talented as they are, is not a good enough team right now to come in and beat this Georgia team in a game of this magnitude. It's just not. I've seen all the comments from LSU fans about Kirby's record against LSU, and while all of that is true, that would make about as much sense as me pointing out what Brian Kelly's record is against UGA. What UGA's record is against LSU under Ed Orgeron and Kirby Smart versus Ed Orgeron is really irrelevant, right? The reality is you fired a coach who could beat Kirby and hired one who can't. So, Brian Kelly's 0-2 versus Kirby. So if you want to bring up the fact that LSU is undefeated against Kirby, okay, well, Georgia's undefeated against Brian Kelly. Now, I don't think either one of those things matter for this game. I just happen to think Georgia's a much better team this year. LSU was a much better team in 2019 when they beat Georgia, and they beat them. In 2018, I wouldn't say LSU was much better than Georgia in 2018. That was probably the closest. Those two teams were pretty close. The game was on the road in Baton Rouge, and LSU got the win. So, congratulations for that. This is a much better Georgia team and not as good of an LSU team, not nearly as what you had in 2019 for sure. And I just think Georgia's going to be too much. Offensively, what do you try to take away? You're going to say Brock Bowers. I mean, you can take Brock Bowers away. We went 4 or 5 weeks in the middle of the season where Brock Bowers didn't even score a touchdown, and in those 4 or 5 games, we averaged 45 points. Brock Bowers is the easy one to point to because he's really the only superstar, but Georgia's got a multitude of ways to score points. We can decide to run the ball, slow the game down, and just beat you into submission and beat you by 10 points if that's what we want to do. We can throw screens and hitch passes all day long and beat you by 14 or 20, or we can mix all that up and throw in a few bombs and beat you by 30 or 40 like we did to Oregon and South Carolina. It just depends what Georgia wants to do and what LSU tries to take away. Harold Perkins is a problem. I'm an Olajari fan as well. His brother played for UGA a few years back. So LSU, look, it's no secret that LSU's got some talented players. That's not a secret. That's why Ed Orgeron was fired 2 years after winning a national title. Not because he had a bad season, but because he had no business having those bad seasons with the talent that was on the roster. So LSU's got some talent. In fact, this is probably the most talented team Georgia has played yet this season. I don't think it's the best team Georgia has played this season, but it's the most talented. And you've got some playmakers. I like your running backs. I already talked about Dejon Boutte and Jaden Daniels. I talked about Harold Perkins and Olajari on defense. I like John Emery Jr. The guy runs hard. I don't think he's the most talented running back in the world, but he runs. There ain't nobody that runs any harder than him. Every time you give him the ball, you get 100% out of that guy. I like that. He kind of reminds me, actually, of that running back y'all used to have And look, I don't know any other way to describe this guy. So I'm just going to describe him this way. But he was that white running back. He wasn't he wasn't the most gifted guy, but the guy was just a problem. Like he just, motor 150% every time y'all will know who I'm talking about. It seems like it was 6, 7 years ago. I don't know. Y'all will know who I'm talking about. That's what he reminds me of. So you got some guys. I just don't think LSU is at a place right now where they're going to be able to come to Atlanta and beat Georgia in the SEC title game. Not this Georgia team. I don't see it happening. Can Georgia win by 17 and a half? I think they can. If LSU's not able to run the ball, yes, Georgia will win by more than 17 and a half. If LSU can't run the ball. Because how many games this year has Jaden Daniels thrown under 100 yards? There's been multiple games this year where Jaden Daniels hasn't even hit 100 yards passing. So if you're not able to run the ball and Jaden Daniels is limited with a hurt ankle and unable to kind of scramble and make things happen and you have to kind of rely on his arm, I just don't think that's going to go well for LSU. 17 and a half is a lot of points for an SEC title game. I'm not going to lay the 17 and a half with Georgia. I'll actually take LSU in the points here. I could see Georgia winning somewhere in the neighborhood of, 31-17, something like that. What would that be? A 14-point game. I could see Georgia winning 30, 35-20, 34-17. So I think that 17 number is close to right. Now, if Georgia goes into halftime up double digits, they're going to cover the 17. LSU has got to keep this thing within striking distance in the first half. If I look up at halftime and the score is, Georgia 17, LSU 3, the game's over and Georgia's going to cover. Or 21-7 or whatever, then the game's over and Georgia's going to cover. You got to try to keep it close in the first half. But I'll take Georgia to win. I don't think it'll be particularly close, but I'll take LSU to cover the 17 and a half. What's next? I'm glad you asked. Purdue and Michigan. Could Purdue upset Michigan? Purdue loves beating top 5 teams. They've made a habit of it over the last few years. They beat Ohio State a time or two when they're ranked really high. They've done it several times. No, they're not beating Michigan. I also don't think Michigan's covering. Michigan's a huge favorite, too. 17 points. Georgia's 17.5-point favorite. Michigan a 17-point favorite. I don't think Michigan will cover. I think Michigan will win. I don't think Purdue is going to really threaten them. But Michigan's coming off a huge emotional win last week against Ohio State on the road in Columbus. You get the news this week that your best player, Blake Corum, is going to miss the remainder of the season. Now, that didn't hurt you against Ohio State. That's not the point. It's just depressing news that you don't want to hear. I think Michigan comes out business-like, and sort of just pushes Purdue around. Purdue feels more like an annoyance at this point to Michigan than a real threat to beat them, in my opinion. I just don't think the Big Ten West is any good. It's worse than the SEC West, and it's not close. And like LSU out of the SEC West, Purdue is just the best they have to offer. I can't see Purdue beating Michigan. Those do seem like too high point spreads, though, for these games. Here's what worries me if I'm a Purdue fan. Everything worries me if I'm a Purdue fan. Michigan could cover this game if Purdue's not able to throw. Purdue's another finesse team, like Ohio State. They are. Nobody throws in the Big Ten. Nobody throws the ball more than Purdue. And there's nothing wrong with throwing the ball. And throwing the ball in and of itself doesn't necessarily make you finesse. But watch Purdue play. You'll see what I mean. That's not a good matchup to go against Michigan. You need to be able to compete on the lines of scrimmage if you want to beat Michigan. This is why Ohio State can't beat them, and Purdue can't compete either. If Michigan decides to come out and play this game, with 100% effort and energy like they did against Ohio State, similar to the Georgia LSU game, they'll win by more than 17. I just think Michigan's going to get a comfortable lead here and kind of sit on it in the second half. You don't want to get anybody hurt in one of these games heading into the playoffs. So, again, I'll take Purdue in the points, but I think Michigan wins comfortably. And then tomorrow night, we've got the ACC title game, one of the most least interesting ACC title games in a while. Clemson and North Carolina. I've got concerns about Clemson. I think on Monday night when me and Pete did the Lunch Money show, I may have picked Clemson in this game. They're a 7.5-point favorite. I've changed my mind. Not only do I think North Carolina can cover in this game, I think North Carolina can win. I've got a lot of concerns about Clemson going forward. There's just a lot of signs that things aren't great there. The talent is nowhere near where it used to be. It's just not. And it's not, I'm not even necessarily talking about the recruiting rankings. But just look at the quarterback and wide receiver positions at Clemson. There is nothing on Clemson's roster right now that comes anywhere close to resembling Trevor Lawrence or Deshaun Watson or the groups of wide receivers they had. Sammy Watkins, Justin Ross, whoever you want to name. They just don't have it. Now, Will Shipley's amazing. He's a running back. He's the best player they have. He's not as good as Travis Etienne was for them a couple of years ago. They're just not in the same place right now offensively, or really even close to where they were when they were at their peak. And even more concerning than that is that defensively, they do have the talent. In fact, this might be the most talented defensive team Clemson has ever had under Dabo Swinney. More talented than any of the national title winning teams they had. And they're not playing well either. They do at times, but this whole story we were fed in the offseason about Clemson having the best front seven in all of football, and all this kind of, and just being dominant in the best defense in football, no, it just hadn't worked out. It's been extremely disappointing. The secondary has proven to be a liability on this team. Sam Hartman of Wake Forest lit them up for 6 or 7 touchdown passes. And I know Sam Hartman is good, but good quarterbacks don't throw 6 or 7 touchdown passes against great defenses. And Clemson is losing the majority of that talent to the NFL on defense, especially up front this year. I would be extremely worried going forward if I was a Clemson fan. Not that they're going to start winning 4 and 5 games a year, but I don't know right now if Clemson is going to be able to get back to where they were at from the years of like 2015 to 2020, at least not immediately. It seems like there's just too many holes there. And then you got the whole Dabo Swinney thing I even mentioned. Allergic to the transfer portal. Doesn't like the way college football has changed in the last few years. All this kind of stuff. The threatening to quit the other day. Fan calls up and he does a call-in show where he takes questions from the fans. Fan calls in and asks an obvious question. Given the troubles that Clemson has had offensively the last couple of years compared to previous years, have you considered making any changes to the offensive staff? Dabo's answer was, we're 10-2. If that's not good enough, maybe I should just quit. That was his answer. Well, I wish I would call up a coach's show and he would give me some horse's ass answer like that. I be done gave him the Uncle Lou treatment with the quickness. I don't know what's going on, but I'm taking North Carolina. I'm going to take the points. I'm going to take the 7.5 points here for North Carolina. They're a 7.5 point underdog. I think that's too many points. Give me North Carolina, and I would not be surprised at all if they end up beating Clemson. All right, I'm going to get this uploaded, and then I'll be live tonight for the Pac-12 championship game at 8 o'clock Eastern. Come hang out, watch the game with me. Hype and hate video for Georgia LSU. I'm not even going to get into the day I've had today. I am still planning on doing a hype and hate video for Georgia and LSU, but it might not be out till about 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, I'm just going to be honest. Have a great day.